A story by Rashid. An old woman lived in a hut on the beach. No one knew how long she had been there, but everyone was convinced she was mad. She had habits that were different than all the others. Some people were very frightened of her. And every once in a while, children would venture close to that hut, and they would come back with stories of hearing these sounds coming from inside that hut, like the sounds of the wind blowing through the pine trees, and the sound of the cracking of thunder. One young couple swore they saw her standing in the moonlight, moving in a strange way and singing in a foreign language. Sometimes they would find symbols written in the sand. Oh, she was mad. But she was harmless, so the people left her alone. And then one spring day, a young man came to that village. Oh, he was smartly dressed, and the villagers guessed he was from the city. He came to see that old woman, and the villagers said, "Oh, you don't want to bother with her, she's mad." But the young man said, "Oh no, I traveled a long, long distance to come and see her. Please, show me the way." So some of the villagers, they muttered to themselves about the ways of city folk, and they took him down the path that led to that beach. And as he walked away, they said, "Don't blame us for what happens." But the days went by, and the storekeeper realized they had not seen that young man in many days. So they began to inquire, as people do, and they thought they best go take a look-see just to make sure he was okay. So the villagers, few of them, they went down that path, and they came to the hillside they knew so well, and when they looked over the top, there was that young man. He was sitting in front of the hut next to the old woman, and they were facing the setting sun. As they watched, the two of them moved rhythmically, and they heard that sound of the wind blowing through the trees and the sound of the cracking of thunder. Some of the villagers ran off to tell the others, and before long, half of the village was there watching and listening. And finally, when the sun went down over that water horizon, the two of them rose, and they were surprised for a second to see all the villagers there. But they smiled. They went into the hut and lit some candles. And then they came out and they gestured for the villagers to join them. Well, that was too much for some of them that ran away. But the children were not frightened. They moved toward that hut, and their parents followed close by to make sure they were all right. And before long, all those villagers were sitting inside that hut, drinking tea and warming themselves by that fire. And then one villager mustered up the courage, and he said, "Please, tell us about those sounds that we hear, the sounds of the wind and the sounds of the thunder. And please tell us what you were doing on that beach. And can you tell us about these symbols on the walls, the same symbols that are carved in the turf behind the village? The story goes that thousands of years ago, a different sort of people lived here. We've been wondering about these things for a long time. Please tell us." And the young man smiled and said, "Oh, you have now. Then why haven't you asked?" And the villagers hung their head and they shuffled their feet, for they had no answer to that question at all. And then the young man smiled, and he turned, and the old woman spoke. The villagers had never heard her voice before, for when she would come to the village, she would point for what she needed. And her voice was like the gentle rain in the mountain. It was like it came from a time long ago. And she said, so you would like to know. There is a time for everything. And I have been waiting a long, long time. I have been waiting for the right time when someone would come here and sit with me and see me. And when the time was right, this young man came. And because you have asked, I will tell you. I will tell you about the sounds, and I will tell you what you need to know. She said, for many, many years, I have been polishing my mind. And the sound that you hear, because I want my mind to be shining bright like a mirror, so that when people look at me, they will see themselves. And the sound of the wind that you hear is the sound of the polish gliding over the surface of that mirror. And the thunder cracking is the breaking open of my heart, so this young man could see what lies inside. A fire was lit in each one of those visitors. And things didn't seem as strange anymore. She said, if you close your eyes, and if you sit quietly and listen, you will hear the sounds of your heart crying out in the wilderness. And if you sit and close your eyes and look at that broken mirror, you will hear these things. And the villagers sat in silence, and they closed their eyes. And there was a bright light, and the villagers heard the sound of the wind, but this time they heard thousands of voices as that wind blew through each and every one of them. They were bewildered. And then a peace settled. And one by one, they opened their eyes, and the fire had died down, and they saw the first lights of dawn. But when they looked around, the old man and the old woman were gone. Some of the villagers said it was just all a dream. They had never been there. But after that, strange things happened. A man moved into that hut, and he began to teach the other villagers the art of polishing their mirrors and listening to their hearts. There was no more gossiping on Saturday mornings at the market, and the children grew bright and radiant as moonbeams. That man didn't know how he knew these things. It's just that when he started to talk, what he said was right. People came from all over the country to come and to learn the art of polishing their mirror and listening to their heart. The villagers drew a winged heart on a mirror, and they placed it over the door of that hut So when people came, they could look at it and they could see and know and understand. No one ever knew what happened to that old woman. But one of the villagers was traveling abroad, and she thought that she saw that young man in a cafe. She couldn't be sure. But when she looked really, really hard, a tiny mirror appeared, and she saw her own reflection in the evening sun.